Now in Syria, injured people who were forced to flee Raqqa described their first-hand experience of U.S.-led airstrikes in their hometown.
The aircrafts bomb using phosphoric bombs. It strikes haphazardly, targeting everyone. It is not hitting Daesh. Daesh are gone. They were defeated, but the coalition are bombing randomly. If you are sitting at home, it may fall down on you. There are houses that collapsed over their residents, and they cannot get out. All this happened because of the aircrafts. And he who escapes dies by mines. Like they say, you see that your enemy is planting landmines. Why are you using aircraft? You can film here and see that no one is there. So why are you bombing? The people are dying for nothing, and no one is helping them.
UN war crimes investigators have denounced a, quote, staggering loss of civilian life caused by a U.S.-backed campaign to seize Raqqa. Investigators said intensification of airstrikes by a so-called U.S.-led coalition against Daesh had led to the deaths of at least 300 civilians throughout the city. Raqqa operation began earlier in June with a ground assault by Syrian Democratic Forces. The umbrella group is comprised of Kurdish and Arab militiamen armed by the U.S. and supported by coalition airstrikes. And now we're going to swing over to Mr. Ken Stone out of Ontario of the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War. Hello, Mr. Stone here. Thanks for joining us on the program. Sir, we see Washington come down heavy on other regimes fighting terror when their airstrikes or field operations result in the loss of civilian life. But through their own aerial campaigns, including drone strikes, we see the same fate for civilians. Yet we don't really see the U.S. assuming accountability in those instances. Why?
The U.S. always operates on a permanent double standard. It always makes a big deal out of civilian casualties when other powers are involved, such as when the Syrian Arab Army successfully and professionally liberated Aleppo last year. But the truth is the U.S. really doesn't care about Syrian civilians. If they did, they wouldn't have started the regime change operation in 2011, which has caused nearly 500,000 deaths and caused nearly 12 million people to be displaced. So it's a double standard, and they pretend to be concerned about civilian casualties, but when they do it themselves, as in Raqqa, they don't pay the least attention to civilian safety. Last year, when the Syrian Arab Army liberated Aleppo, they did not carpet bomb the city. What they did instead is they went house to house, street by street, neighborhood by neighborhood, liberating small sections of the city and opening civilian corridors for the civilians to flee. Now that was a professional operation with minimal civilian casualties, and the Syrian government got the terrorists on buses and sent them away to the nearby province of Idlib. When I was in Syria last year, I asked the Syrian Minister of Reconciliation, Mr. Ali Haider, why the Syrian government doesn't carpet bomb terrorist-held areas. And he said that it was because the Syrian government has a duty to protect Syrian civilians. And so they would never do that kind of thing. And moreover, these terrorists, sponsored by the United States and its coalition partners, have torn the fabric of Syrian society apart. And the Syrian government is thinking about after the war and having all the Syrian people working together for a peaceful country. When we're talking about Raqqa, we're talking about the United States becoming more and more reckless as it loses territory to the Syrian army. And it's trying right now in Raqqa to create a separate state, to partition Syria using renegade Kurds and Arabs. And the reason that they're doing this is because they know that their regime change operation has failed, and so they're trying now to break up the Syrian state. And they become more reckless every day because in the last month they have attacked the Syrian army 3 times, and they have put the world closer to World War III any time since the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. So I think it's time for peace activists around the world to be calling on the U.S. coalition to get out of Syria, keep their hands out of Syria, and let the Syrian people decide their own future.
Thank you for joining us, Mr. Ken Stone out of Ontario, for the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War.